9 degrees in downtown Seattle. I'm Ursula Royteen.
From Sunday Mariners baseball to Seahawks football, this is KIRO Radio 97.3 FM. News and talk, powered by the Pacific Northwest.
The Big Lead is brought to you by 3010 Weight Loss for Life.
The Dori Monson Show on KIRO Radio. This is The Big Lead.
Coming to you from the Carter Subaru studio. Welcome. Welcome to the big show. Good to be back after a little 4-day weekend. I'll tell you all about that a little bit later on. But, man, we have a lot of news to get to this afternoon, including, you just heard in Ursula's newscast, 34 times now, Fergie has sued the Trump administration. And yet, we have an unconstitutional gun initiative that passed in our state in November. Bob Ferguson remains silent on that. He would rather let an unconstitutional law start to affect people's lives than to take on the gun issue, because that would hurt his climb to the governor's mansion. We have cities that continue to try to impose unconstitutional income taxes. Bob Ferguson, silent on that, because he wants the big money machine to be humming so he can get to the governor's mansion. You have, time after time, unconstitutional issues throughout our state where Bob Ferguson remains absolutely silent. The superintendent of public instruction wants an unconstitutional income tax. Bob Ferguson would never take on the schools and the unions. He needs them. But the Trump administration, he'll file 34 lawsuits to raise his public profile. He remains the most dangerous elected official I've ever covered in this state, because the Constitution means nothing to our Attorney General. His political climb is all he cares about. And with that as mere prelude, let's get right to The Big Lead.
The Big Lead, Dori Monson Show exclusive.
This is an exclusive. I haven't heard anybody else talk about this. But in Olympia, you have likely heard that there is an effort to make daylight saving time permanent in the state of Washington. 2 proposals to put us on permanent daylight saving time have advanced in the legislature. They both seem to have bipartisan support. I think it's ridiculous. I have no idea why this is a priority at all in Olympia. But one aspect of this that nobody is talking about is it is going to change a 45-year tradition for these guys. If daylight saving time becomes permanent here in Washington, the TV networks are not going to alter game times because we've altered our clocks. The networks have a very firm schedule. The early games are at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. The late games are at 4:05 or 4:25 Eastern, 1:05 and 1:25 Pacific time. Now, when we switch over the clocks, usually, everything stays the same. Now, when the rest of the nation switches over and Washington does not, you know what that's going to mean? The early Seahawk games, the East Coast games, are going to kick off at 11 a.m. And the home games will start at either 2:05 or 2:25 instead of the 1 o'clock hour, so that Seattle can stay in sync with the rest of the West Coast when the rest of the coast moves to standard time. It also means much later nights. You got a Monday night, Sunday night football game. Instead of a 5:30 kickoff, they'll be starting at 6:30, taking those games deep into the night. Just dumb. Just dopey that our state is going to be one of the few to keep daylight saving time year-round. But that's just one aspect of it that I thought about this morning that nobody else has talked about. It's going to alter the start of football games by an hour. Probably not baseball because they don't have a national television contract that they have to adhere to. But football games, that's going to be a change because it's been the same schedule my entire life. Now, do you still like this dopey plan? Next up in the big lead.
The big lead, big local.
But it is that kind of genius flowing out of our state, like permanent daylight saving plan, that has the rest of the nation saying, how can we get a piece of say-wah? And it turns out the answer is Jay Inslee for president. He went on Face the Nation yesterday, where he, faced the nation. And, bless his heart, he gets a little lost. He gets these phrases that they've workshopped, and he's decided that this is a winning phrase. And then he gets lost with that phrase. And this is going to be a real Achilles heel for Inslee in the fires of the campaign trail because he's not a great thinker on his feet. He can memorize a line and then repeat it, but then when he says it over and over, let me play you an example.
When are you actually going to make a decision on whether you're running?
At the right moment, but it'll be soon.
Which is when?
And we're happy to talk to you. Just at the right moment, it will be soon.
I think you said weeks, not months.
We're coming up to another week. Stay tuned.
We are, certainly. Are you expecting it this week?
It could be as soon as that. And what we are seeing right now, and I've been pleased by what I've been hearing across the country, that people do want a president that will act on a real emergency, which is climate change.
Okay, now that's his phrase that they workshopped for Face the Nation. America wants a real emergency. A president who will work on a real emergency, and that is climate change, meaning not the wall. But then he just kind of said the same thing over and over. And this is where I just get kind of sad for Jay Inslee.
A president that will act on a real emergency, which is climate change. We're very proud of our New Mexico governor who's building a clean energy economy to respond to a real emergency, which is climate change.
Listen, didn't you just say that seconds ago? You forgot that you already said it once? You got it in twice in 10 seconds.
But she and the other governors, look, we're fighting real emergencies. The forest...
Real emergency. He just keeps saying it over and over. The poor guy, he just can't handle this level of competition. Being governor's it's a remarkable achievement for Jay Inslee. But I think AA ball is kind of the capper for him. I don't think that he's big league ready.
Fires that are consuming the western United States. They need a president who will rally the nation to a clean energy economy, jobs by the millions, and save this country from that damage.
Okay. So he kept using the phrase real emergency over and over again. And then he went on MSNBC along with that CBS appearance and continued to make the case.
Nothing productive. The president still is living in this never, never land and feeding us a bunch of baloney. This vanity project of his, and that's what it is, it's not a national emergency, it's a political emergency for him in his failures. And this has been rejected by both parties. That's the thing that is interesting. To me, there has been a bipartisan rejection of this waste of money. We could be spending these billions of dollars educating kids. We do have a national emergency in climate change, and we've talked about today with governors the facts that we do have real emergencies in our states and forest fires and floods that he continues to do nothing about.
So they told him before they sent him out on all the Sunday talk shows, keep saying real emergency. Just say it over and over again. And, my goodness, it's just so funny to listen to
Well, unfortunately, that seems to be the case. I brought our concerns to the EPA administrator, acting administrator yesterday. Of course, they ignored the science. They ignored the clear consensus, the clear recognition by Donald Trump's own government has found that this is really an existential threat to the security and safety and health of our country.
Right there. That's the other phrase. It's an existential threat. That's one that they must have workshopped really hard the last couple of weeks, that climate change is an existential threat. And this is why I'm up till 3 a.m. working on this radio show, because when I heard Inslee call climate change an existential threat, I realized that's the phrase that everybody is using. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
And so for me, this is an existential issue. We need wartime mobilization around climate change, and that level of economic mobilization is going to be required.
Okay, so it's an existential emergency. It's an existential threat. The people that they quote, here's more AOC.
And in the same way that we have an urgency when we mobilize entire economies around existential war crises or threats, I don't see any larger
existential war crises or threats. The professors who are pushing this, they are using the exact same phrase.
This is an existential threat.
Mm-hmm. How about at the summit, Secretary General Antonio Guterres?
Climate change is quite simply an existential threat for most life on the planet.
They have to use it even with their adorable accents. How about the Russia Times television anchor?
25 years ago, 1,700 scientists signed a letter which warned mankind that we were facing an existential threat.
It's so funny to hear a phrase that's workshopped and they decide it's not enough to call it a threat. That won't get people's trillions of dollars. We got to amp it up a little bit. So we'll all call it an existential threat. So that's what Jay Inslee calls it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The professors who are part of this rigged scam, they have all worked together, politicians and scientists, to come up with a plan to transfer the most amount of money in the history of the human race, trillions of dollars, from private to governmental control. And when you hear how coordinated the effort is, when you know that they don't all come up with that phrase on their own, this is all, there's a guiding hand over all of this. And it guides the politicians and it guides the scientists. And then the politicians say there's a scientific consensus. But you can tell that they're all working together. It's so obvious. A little closer to home, up next in the Big Lead.
The Big Lead, Bizarro World.
So up in the Klahani neighborhood in Sammamish, there was some hate graffiti that appeared around the neighborhood. It was first noticed Tuesday morning. It had some racist symbols and language. The TV stations that went out there, they said that they can't even show on television some of the stuff that had been spray painted. One of the victims was a guy named Dex Montenegro, who talked to Q13 News.
And that over there says clown, clown, clown. I'm assuming this is a clown face, so.
And who does he believe is behind this?
I hope it's just a bunch of kids that are bored and they don't have any time on their hands and just messing around, messing with people. But, you know, realistically, there's probably some racism going on. You know, they're probably taking advantage of all the stuff that's going on in the media.
Well, then the question has to be, is it real? And I don't know the answer to this. But I do know that we have seen so many faked hate crimes lately, the Jussie Smollett being the most obvious and notable of the last couple of weeks. But there is just an incredible litany of fake hate crimes over the last couple of years in particular. And it's been driven by this pathological hatred of the president. And so Jussie Smollett, he blew up his career. You know, he had a decent thing going on a hit television show. He did private concerts. And he might be going to prison now because his hatred for Trump was so great that he decided to fake a hate crime. And in this day and age, I have no idea if this is a real hate crime up in Sammamish or if it's more fake like we've seen everywhere else. I just think everybody has to be really careful these days when there have been so many of these things dummied up. Here's another resident, Cal Doro, who talked to Q13 News.
Kind of felt that we kind of had a more progressive community up here. Then I come over here and I see a swastika, and I'm like, dear Lord, what kind? I didn't really expect this kind of hate to be in Klahani, you know.
No, and here's the other guy who, Annalisa Torres. She went from Seattle to a rally yesterday to support the people in Klahani.
I'm from Seattle. I came here specifically to be in solidarity with the residents who have been targeted by the vandalism, the bigotry, and anti-Semitic messages, which I find completely unacceptable.
And another person who traveled to this rally for love yesterday, Yasmin Abdel-Dayem. She has lived in Sammamish.
I want him to know that kindness always wins, and I want him to grow up in this community not feeling judged and not feeling that he has to prove something. Okay, and just as a word of caution, I saw over the weekend a list of bogus hate crimes just before the 2016 election. Hopewell Baptist Church was attacked with fire and graffiti that said, "Vote Trump." And it turns out the arsonist was an African-American member of that church. Heil Trump and the gay F-word slur were spray painted on St. David's Episcopal Church in Indiana right after the election. It was the gay organ player at the church who did it. 18-year-old Lasmin Sewell told police 3 Donald Trump supporters harassed her and tried to steal her hijab on a train in New York City, but that hate crime fell apart 2 weeks later when she admitted she made the whole thing up because she'd been out late drinking with friends and was afraid her strict Muslim Egyptian father would be angry. And I've got lists and pages and pages and pages of fake hate crimes in the country. And so I don't know what to believe anymore when I hear these stories. I hope that there aren't ignorant, hateful people painting those things in Sammamish, and I hope there aren't hateful, ignorant people faking these things in Sammamish. It's sad, though, that there have been so many of these dummied up that you have a tough time figuring out which ones are true anymore. And that is your big lead for today.
The Big Lead on KIRO Radio.
We're going to check the news for you, and then, man, I listened to a lot of the Facebook Live of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as she was cooking chili last night. I'm not going to suffer through this alone. I'm dragging you down with me. Details coming up on the Dori Monson Show.